It might not always seem like it, but Konami actually takes pretty good care of paying attention to what cards people are actually entering and winning and topping tournaments with. I mention this because if you've ever played in a regional flight and won that regional flight, you might know that you can't actually get your deck list back. That deck list, as well as other topping lists from YCS and regionals, get sent off to Konami for them to research, and that's sort of some of the ways that they actually address the current format and make new ban lists and products. And for the most part, Konami doesn't share whatever information they have with the general public. This means if you want to know a topping or winning deck list, you can't just go on the official Konami site. If you paid attention to Yu-Gi-Oh! Way back in the day when metagame.com was where all the Yu-Gi-Oh! Articles were posted, you might remember that they actually did post the topping deck list, but that changed when Konami took over, and I think in general it's for the better. If you were someone that topped an event, maybe you thought your deck was super special and you don't want to share it with the world, now you don't have to worry about Konami sharing it with everyone without your permission. In general though, nowadays if you want to learn someone's deck list, you don't go to the official Konami site, you have to go to a third-party website like YouTube or Facebook or TCG Player. Konami has decided to share with us the top 10 most side-decked cards out of the top 32 of YCS Knoxville, and this is pretty unprecedented and pretty darn cool. Sure, you can find some of this by looking at the posted deck list, but a lot of the players that topped Knoxville seem to be withholding information, and that's no surprise because the WCQ is coming up, and usually the last YCS before the WCQ, you find a lot of people withholding their side decks, withholding their main decks. So while Konami isn't saying exactly how many copies of these cards were played, we at least can look at this and know, well, yeah, okay, some of these cards are rising or falling in popularity. I want to make two final notes before we break into the list. The first thing is that you really do have to keep in mind what the actual top 32 deck breakdown looked like, which is something that they have posted. You got to keep in mind that there were 10 Orcus decks, 9 Danger Thunder decks, 8 Salamangreat decks, and 5 Sky Strikers. There were no Rogue decks that topped this event, and also keep in mind if a card is being played in both Orcus and Danger Thunder, it's a lot more likely to end up on this list because they took up a lot of the top 32. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is only counting the side deck. Even if a card is commonly played in the side deck or the main deck, it's not counting any of the copies that were main decked, and that's a pretty big deal with a few of these entries. And of course, if you'd like to purchase any of the cards that I talk about in today's video because you're trying to get a leg up on the competition for the WCQ, make sure to check out tcgplayer.com. There is a link in the description. They are kindly sponsoring today's video talking about these top 10 most side decked cards. This is really cool because you know these cards are successful. We have proof that they currently are being used. It's the perfect time to pick them up if you don't have all these cards, and there's no better place than TCG Player. At number 10 we have Kousaka, which to some players like myself when I first read that said, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. There were a lot of Danger Thunder Dragon, but looking at the list that we have available, we have around half of the Thunder Dragon list publicly available to people that want to see on TCG Player. Looking at them, only one of the ones that's actually out there played Kousaka, and sure, they played 3 copies of it, but I think if anything, this is showing me that there's a lot of different variety in what people are actually playing in their side decks. For a card like Kousaka to be on this list, if it's not very popular just with the list that we have available, that implies that the other cards, especially the ones on the bottom of this list, maybe weren't as popular as a lot of people think they were. Without looking up any of the deck lists that are available, you might have guessed that Kousaka was a staple 3 of in every single Thunder list, and that would imply that like a whole bunch of people were playing a lot of these cards. However, if you go through the side decks that are available, you'll notice that a lot of people are playing a lot of different tech options that, yes, do similar things, but not quite the same. And I really want you to keep that in mind when we talk about the number 9 entry, which is Mystic Mine. Now, looking at the Kousaka entry, we can see that Mystic Mine wasn't nearly as popular as it might seem on the initial read-through of this top 10 list. However, it does mean that more players than just the Skysticker players are actually side decking this card. Most of the Skysticker players were main decking 1 or 2 copies of Mystic Mine, and they were side decking 1 or 2 copies to make a total of 3 copies between their main and side deck. But the very fact that Mystic Mine is on this top 10 list, and also we do have some of the Orcus lists available, you can see that a lot of Orcus players were trying out Mystic Mine either in the main or side deck. It's an incredibly powerful card against the Danger Thunder Thunder Dragon list when you go second, and they already are playing cards like Terraforming and Set Rotation. Just seems like a natural fit to sort of blank out the entire Thunder board, do their full combo, and then you can use the Galatea to play your own field spell over the Mystic Mine to break it. The big takeaway here is that if you play against Orcus at the WCQ, keep in mind that they very likely are going to have at least one copy of Mystic Mine between their main or side deck, and they have a lot of ways to access it. So if you go first against them, be prepared to get Mystic Mined. Don't just side out all of your back row removal because a lot of their cards are monster effects. You want to make sure you have some sort of out to a degenerate field spell because, yeah, Mystic Mine is annoying when it's played in a pure deck, and it's really strong when it's played in Sky Strikers, but it's especially crazy played in a combo deck because now you can't hand trap any of the Orcus combo cards. The next three cards actually were a three-way tie, so 8, 7, and 6 were all sided the exact same amount. First off, we have Droll and Lockbird, which was pretty insane for me to read, and when I went back at the deck list, I saw that it actually was sided quite a bit. Recently, Droll and Lockbird has sort of fallen out of favor. It wasn't getting sided nearly as much as it was like 6 months ago, but it looks like it's back in full force if people are really playing it this much, at least in the top 32 of YCS Knoxville. It's not super surprising when you think about it, because this card against the Danger Thunder Dragon deck, which is probably the second best deck of the format, is basically an extra copy of Artifact Lancia. Sure, they can still banish cards, but by turning off their search effects, you really lose a lot of the utility of the Danger Thunder Dragon deck. For example, you no longer can search off the baby Chaos Dragons, you don't get the draws off the Danger monsters, and you also can't do your big Guard Dragon combo by summoning Brotar and searching the Chaos Levianeer. While Drona Lockbird isn't nearly as impactful as Artifact Lancia, it still is a really good choice because you're not always going to draw those Lancias. Against Orcus, maybe not as good, but does have some utility against both Salamangreats and Sky Strikers, the other big decks of the format. The next card that was tied was Electric Virus, and this isn't super surprising if you've been looking at the Danger Thunder Dragon list out there right now, because this is pretty much a staple side deck card as a 3 of in a lot of those lists. Maybe not as much of a staple as some of the other cards when we get to the higher points of this list, but in general it is still very popular and for a good reason. The thing that you do with Electric Virus is that you let your opponent set up their entire board, and then if they summon a Hot Red Dragon Archfiend, you can steal it with the Electric Virus, and now they don't really have a lot of ways to deal with your cards because you can use the Hot Red Dragon Archfiend to bait the Zombie Stein, and then their only real form of interruption if they did the full combo is the Herratic Link monster, which isn't that much against a mirror match because you can do so many plays with the Danger Thunder monsters. Some players already knew that Electric Virus was popular and they started not playing Hot Red and instead played Crystal Wing, which is a pretty decent counter to Electric Virus because you can just negate its effect. In that way, Electric Virus still baits a negation, but it's not quite as good as stealing the Hot Red, being able to use the effect, and also using it for link material. And then the last card of that three-way tie was Fantastical Dragon Phantasm, and this is where I want to make a note that this is only looking at side decks, and that's very important because this was probably one of, if not the most played cards in the entire top 32 if we look at main and side decks, but the fact of the matter is a lot of people were already maining this card in Danger Thunder, in Salamangreat, so it's not going to be as high on the list as you might expect it to be. Sure, a lot of people are still side decking it, and it's still a very good card in the side deck, and you can't play it in every deck. Most of the Orcus decks weren't playing this card, and all of the Sky Striker decks weren't playing this card, but it's still very popular, especially when you look at the main deck. So it might seem low on the list, and it's still a very powerful card. It just means that not everyone out there is main decking this card quite yet. A lot of the Danger Thunder decks are still just not maining any hand traps and just going full combo, although admittedly when you look at the list breakdown, some people still are main decking that Fantastical Dragon Phantasm in those Danger Thunder lists. Even though they're not drawing into hand traps, they are fixing their hand and getting a ton of value off of that draw effect. Next up, and we're no longer talking about tied monsters, we're at the number 5 spot, and that is Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Very similar to Droll Lockbird, this is a card that sort of went out of the meta for a long time, a couple months now, and suddenly it's back in the game. The biggest reason this card happens to be very good against both Sky Strikers and Danger Thunder. The reason it's good against Sky Strikers is pretty obvious. You hit the multi-roll and that stops a lot of their recycling plays, especially now that they're down to just one Kagari. Against the Guard Dragons, you can use this card because all of them require you to have something pointing to a specific spot to resolve their effects. By using Ghost Ogre, they can't resolve because they don't point anywhere anymore, and that's a pretty big deal. It definitely shuts down a huge aspect of their opening combos. Once again, when you're playing against decks like Orcus and Danger Thunder, there isn't really an amount of hand traps that's too much. You want to have as many cards as possible to stop them from playing the game, because if those two decks get to play the game and get to do their full combo, you're down a lot of cards, and also they have a crazy big board. By using more cards like Ghost Ogre and Drone Lockbird in addition to Artifact Lancia, you can definitely help prevent yourself from having to play through one of the most devastating boards in the game. At the third and fourth spot, we have a two-way tie, and the first card is No Material. I've talked about this card a lot in the past. I actually think it's a huge sleeper pick, and clearly people are picking it up for YCS Knoxville and the WCQ. It makes sense, especially if you're not playing Phantasm, which many of the Orcus decks weren't. This card just completely stops the entire Orcus combo if it resolves. The reason is that when you do the Orcus combo, you have to summon a Link 2 Nightmare monster, and both of them in the game right now don't have downward pointing arrows. Phoenix and Cerberus only point up and then either to the left or right, which means if you use No Material on them, your opponent just can't summon from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. But No Material is also good against Salamangreats and Danger Thunder. Maybe not to the extent as Orcus, but as I've mentioned in past videos, it's pretty solid, just slowing your opponent down. Right now, no matter what deck you're playing, you don't want your opponent to combo off. Obviously, with decks like Danger Thunders and Orcus, it's a little scarier if they actually full combo, but even against things like Salamangreats, it's good to just blank their turn and make them make awkward or uncomfortable plays. No Material is a card that can do that, and that means a lot of people were trying to play it in their side decks at Knoxville and likely at the WCQ. Tied with No Material, we have Dino Wrestler Pankatops, which is an incredibly versatile side deck card that can deal with pretty much any rogue strategy in the format. It certainly has applications against all four of the top decks, maybe not the best card against any of those decks. It's really good against Sky Strikers though, especially if you're not playing Fantastical Dragon Phantasm, but in general, the sheer value of Pankatops against those other rogue decks of the format is not to be ignored. Keep in mind that there aren't a lot of formats out there like the one we're in where you have 4 different top strategies. There's a lot of formats where there's 2 different best decks or maybe 3 different best decks, but right now there's truly 4 different decks that you can play that are all considered meta, and that means that you have to have a lot of side and main deck spots for those decks. In that way, when you're building your side deck, you really want to have a card that's good against pretty much every rogue deck you can encounter, just so you're not taking an auto loss to those decks. In those rogue matchups, there's no better all-purpose neutral card than the Dino Wrestler, because that can really deal with almost any deck you're expected to play against. And while it is pretty good against the top decks, mainly I think the reason people are playing that, especially outside of the Sekka's Light decks that can't play a lot of the other cards you might think of against rogue strategies, you really want to have a card that can just plow through the decks that aren't the expected meta, just to make sure you don't have nothing against them. Especially if you're main decking tech options against the meta, sometimes those aren't good against those rogue decks. You need to take them out for something. What else to take them out for than a card that has 2600 attack, is a free special summon, and can also blow up a card on either player's turn. And then you have the number 2 spot that I'm pretty sure if you looked at the main and side decks would be almost tied with the number 1 spot. However, almost all the Salamangreat players were main decking this card, and that's Twin Twisters. What's interesting is that despite the fact that 8 of the top 32 were main decking this card, most of the Salamangreat players were, at least the ones that we have knowledge of right now, this card still is number 2 on the list. And it's number 2 because it's being played in almost every deck out there right now, especially if we're looking at just the top 4 strategies. Things like Sky Strikers want to play this card against the Mirror Match and against Orcus, take out those Fog Blades. And Orcus and Thunder Dragons want to play this card to not lose to Floodgates in decks like Sky Strikers. Salamangreats are usually main decking this card, so they're probably not contributing too much to this card's placement on this top 10 list, but still, Twin Twisters is everywhere, and this list proves it. So if you're playing a rogue back row deck like Altergeist or Guru Control, you really have to be prepared to play against Twin Twister and Denko Sekka a lot of rounds. And that brings us to the number 1 spot, and if the lists that we have available are anywhere to look, I think that it's safe to say that almost every single person, if not every single person, was side decking 3 copies of this card, so it's no surprise that it's at the number 1 spot on Konami's list. Artifact Lancia is the only good counter to Danger Thunder and Orcus that works every single time in every single scenario. It's especially funny against Orcus because it can stop your opponent from using Claw by the Grave on your other hand traps, but overall it's just the 1 of card, or the 3 of card I should say, but the 1 specific card that you can draw against those 2 top decks, which are the most popular decks right now, that just completely completely stops their entire turn. It just forces them to pass pretty much in a lot of cases. Maybe in Danger Thunders, sometimes you can play through Lancia and get a few negations out there, but as far as the Orcus deck goes, almost all of their combos revolve around banishing multiple cards, so Artifact Lancia just stops their turn entirely. I don't think this choice will surprise anyone, but what it means, in case you didn't know, is that if you're playing a rogue strategy that requires you to banish cards, and Infernoids come to mind, or I'm sure there's other stuff as well, if you're playing a deck like that, it's a really bad time for you to be playing it. It's a huge uphill battle because every single person in an event pretty much are going to be playing Artifact Lancia in their side deck. I've never really seen a situation where there's been this much of a staple side deck card. I mean, Twin Twisters gets up there and we've seen other cards come close, but it's really crazy to think that every single deck is playing Artifact Lancia right now. No matter what deck you're playing, you just don't want to lose to Danger Thunder or Orcus, and this is the best card to stop their big combos. Anyway though, that's going to wrap up today's video. I'm sorry it's a little bit longer than my usual videos, but I just really felt like I had a lot to say about all 10 of these entries. I don't know if Konami will do this going forward, but it was really helpful, and I think it's a really cool way to drive more traffic to the Konami articles. Right now there's not a lot to read out there. They post sporadically. They don't really do consistent uploads for those articles, and while I do think some of their uploads are important, this really is like a really unique perspective that you can't get anywhere else. The strategy articles are cool and all, but actually giving us information that you can't find as a public, just regular player is really awesome, and I hope going forward they do more of it because I think people really appreciated their insight. Anyway though, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.